What do you get when you combine Mario RPG, Pokemon, and dot hack sign, and then just wrap it all up in a series that has technically been around for nearly 20 years? Well, I'll tell you, you get the Terrain of Magical Expertise, or TOME for short, a game that, over the last few decades, we've been able to watch grow from very humble beginnings, starting with a small sprite-based cartoon, then going on to an animated series, and finally, now into a full-fledged game. And if you are one of those people who are only here to check out the gameplay elements, feel free to jump ahead in the video, timestamps are in the description. But, let me tell you, the origin story here might actually be even more interesting than the game itself, and we are going to talk about it. An abridged version anyway, this is still a game review. So let's all hop into our Wayback Machine to the prehistoric age of 2004. I feel my bones rattling already. To a time before YouTube, when Newgrounds was the place to be for all the newest online creator content, where flash videos and games were all the rage. And you didn't have a bunch of schmucks just popping up on camera, interrupting the entire flow of the video just to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. Because, you know, who would do that? It's lame. And during this time, a young creator, with the help of his friends, decided to craft a story featuring himself and the avatars of all of his online friends adventuring in an MMORPG that would go beyond the realm of the game it took place in. A story called TTA, or TV Tome Adventures, featuring animated sprites taking place on the Terrain of Magical Expertise. Think of TTA like dot hack sign, which it was heavily inspired by, only this wasn't completely boring. Or for those of you too young to get that reference, it's like the predecessor to Sword Art Online, just, you know, without all the controversy. Or at least, it was. Yeah, let's just get this out of the way real quick. The main creator of the series, Christopher 15, has been enveloped in some controversy that, from what I can tell, has gotten him cancelled. Maybe. Not 100% on that. Feel free to look it up. I'll let you decide on where you stand on that. But before all of that happened, old Kerr made quite the name for himself. Aside from TTA, as his animation skills improved, he would grow in notoriety by producing other successful Flash videos such as Parody Rangers, Brawl Taunts, a Super Mario RPG music video, and would even later go on to do animations in collaboration with popular YouTubers. And eventually would even become a professional voice actor in animes like ReZero, Mob Psycho 100, and Sword Art Online. It all comes full circle, doesn't it? And as his influence grew, TOME would return, eventually getting a reboot, this time ditching the sprites as well as the anime aesthetic in favor of completely hand-drawn Western-style animation. And with the success of the reboot and the power of Kickstarter, the series based in a game would finally become a game, being released on Steam, leading us here to the Terrain of Magical Expertise, a turn-based RPG set in an MMORPG. Let's log in. Hey gamers, username SpammerD here, and look, I just want to put this out here right at the beginning real quick. I have been a huge fan of TOME since like the second season of the original Sprite series. So obviously, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a longtime fan. But you don't have to be a longtime fan to enjoy this. Newcomers are completely welcome, and they won't miss a beat. That said, longtime fans might accidentally mistake TOME for being a part of the Batman universe, as once again, it's a reboot, with a completely new story that is a far cry from its predecessors, with one of its major differences this time around being you. Yes, unlike the previous adventures that were centered around new player Alpha, alongside his friends Curb, Flamey, Game Crazed, and
Nylok, Dragon of the Cold Steel!
This time around, you're the star, as an elite hacker who has infiltrated the game to take down a bunch of cheating douchebags. Though to imply that Alpha and crew are just side characters this time around might be a bit of a stretch, as this version of TOME is much more character driven than it is, say, adventure focused. The previous two outings felt much more like watching a shonen anime, with the virtual world and the lives in it at stake. Here though, the stakes aren't nearly as big, but they feel more personal for every character, giving the main cast a lot of time to shine. Excluding you, who is more of a pseudo-silent protag. I mean, you talk and participate, but you don't really have your own story or character growth. Also, and this is super important, being an RPG, I have no intention of spoiling the story. However, I feel that it is unfortunately necessary, in this day and age, to mention this bit. This game takes place in a world meant to be our own, in 2020. Yeah. Talks of pandemics and masks are in the game, as well as a lot of other talking points that would certainly be considered woke. And while a lot of the game's dialogue is really well written, their opinions on these subjects, well, let's just say they aren't exactly subtle.
Sure hope everyone's remembering to wear their masks and also to wash their hands.
So if that kind of thing is a deal breaker for you, well, you've been warned. But I personally don't care. Like, not at all. Either way, it means nothing to me. Me, myself, I just want to ignore this world and dive into the World of Tome. The World of Tome is an online MMORPG, from the perspective of the characters. But for us, it's a top-down RPG set on an isometric plane, with the characters and enemies wandering around on it. Side by side, it's pretty clear to see the Mario RPG influence. And not just in the overworld either, but more on that in a moment. The game itself is actually pretty linear and kind of feels a little small, especially for an MMO world. Overall, it just comes off as simple, like a lot of classic RPGs. Doubly so for the interface, which ironically feels like old Flash videos. In fact, the entire game kind of reminds me of a souped up Flash game from the early 2000s, which does have its charm. Where the game's visuals really shine, however, is easily in the bright and colorful character designs, which there are a plethora of. Which isn't surprising, as a lot of the returning characters were based on real people's designs when the series first started. Plus a lot of new ones that come from backers on Kickstarter, as well as the cameo characters.
Who are you guys supposed to be?
Oh, you mean us? We're just some theorists. The Game Theorists!
Oh my god, Matt, why? Honestly, I just really like that it feels like what you'd expect from actual people creating their own unique characters in a game world. You know, minus any lookalikes that might draw ire from Nintendo or Capcom, plus, you know, other designs. Of course, in our cultured society, gamers would never do something so obscene. So, how do you match such great character design? Why, with great voice acting, of course. Which, by the by, I didn't edit in MatPat's voice. Him and all the other players, big and small, have voice work, even during combat, which certainly adds a bit of individuality to the fights. Plus, there is some real star power here, featuring YouTubers, pros, and amateurs alike. Curb really went in flexing his influence for this game. And while I won't just sit here listing them off, I will mention the most interesting case, which has to be Curbifer15 himself. As for the first time in the series, he's not being voiced by Chris. You know, the creator, who's also a professional voice actor, who isn't playing the character based on himself this time. Instead, it's Aaron... why does nobody have an easy last name to say? Who some of you might know as the voice actor of Senku from Dr. Stone, the Prez from Kaguya-sama, and Oscar from Ruby. And he does a fantastic job. Easily my favorite character. The funny thing is though, the voiceovers have so much character that they almost overshadow the rest of the game's audio, including the music, which by the by is great. It fits the theme, you can most certainly hear the Mario RPG influence, and they were definitely having some fun with it. And speaking of Mario RPG, let's get to what I alluded to at the start. How this game feels like a fusion of Mario RPG, Pokemon, and Dot Hack, and dive right into the real meat of the game. Now, I already mentioned how the overworld clearly parallels Mario RPG, from the movement to the puzzles to how the enemies are placed. However, unlike Mario RPG, or most typical RPGs in general, random battles don't give out experience. In fact, you can't even level in this game at all. Stats are completely based around the gear you have equipped, and the moves are unlocked by completing dojos. Random battles mostly just exist to net you money, and this may seem odd, especially for RPG vets, but I think it works, as it eliminates a lot of pointless fights and grinding. Whether you think that's a good thing or bad thing really does come up to personal preference though, but it didn't bother me. But I should mention that enemy players basically come at you the way trainers do in Pokemon, except there is no avoiding them. So let's brawl. Though, before we do though, I should mention that being a turn-based RPG means that the combat is a far stretch from the fast-paced Mega Man Battle Network style that the animated series used. So, if you have a hankering for that, I'd actually recommend checking out another indie title, One Step from Eden, which will definitely scratch that itch. I reviewed that one a ways back, and I definitely recommend checking it out for all you longtime Tome fans. Getting back to this game though, battles are mostly turn-based bouts. You give commands to each character you control individually, but there is a much greater focus on how they all work together as a group, as each member does have their own health bar, but they all share an MP pool, so you have to choose your attacks carefully. Each character is given up to 4 commands to choose from: Strike, Magic, Strategy, and Items. Strike is your character's basic attack, and again, it pulls heavily from Mario RPG. Although your character will attack automatically, pressing the attack command at just the right time will allow for extra hits. And landing basic hits will also restore MP. Also, timing the attack button when your opponent attacks will allow you to block, mitigating the damage. So it's a much more active version of the turn-based system, but it goes much further than that. Magic commands are where things get interesting on multiple fronts. First, in order to effectively use magic, every spell utilizes different button commands, with different consequences should you fail to land them. Like say when an enemy inverts your controls. Oh man, that's a fun one. But on top of that, here's where more of the Pokemon references come into play. But I'll let Curb explain that.
So, first of all, as you may have noticed, there are 4 different elemental alignments in the game: Technical, Crystal, Infernal, and Natural, which is basically their fancy way of dressing up electricity, ice, fire, and wood respectively.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward, but it also makes battles against groups of different element-based foes require a bit more strategy, especially since, again, the team shares MP, as well as your party is constantly changing for story reasons, so there's really no finding just one thing that works and sticking with it. You gotta keep changing things up. But wait, didn't I mention .hack earlier? Yeah, and it's more than just the fact that the game takes place in a virtual world. As I mentioned at the start, you are a hacker, and under the strategy command, alongside the defend and scan, is the hack ability. And just like in the .hack games, you have the ability to hack your foes, or yourself for stat boosts and other perks. But doing so will make the game unstable, so it's best not to go too far. The virtual game, not the real game. And while hacking may seem like cheating if you use it against average players, you need it in order to counter enemy hackers. You know what they say, fight fire with fire. Otherwise, they'll be one-shotting you and using other cheap tricks. Now, despite how simple all of these elements are individually, combined, they make for a very fun and engaging take on classic turn-based combat. That said though, it is surprisingly straightforward. You're never going to really run into any major twists or difficulty spikes, so it rarely gets that challenging. But there is one glaring problem: glitches. Now, hopefully this will all get past at some point, but I suffered quite a few setbacks, losing more than 4 hours of game time from the game just crashing or getting stuck because it couldn't handle all the status effects, or something like that. And right near the climax of the game too. Still though, it wasn't frequent enough to actually deter me. It's just really annoying. If I had to make any real complaints, it's that, as a longtime fan, it's kind of a shame to see some of the elements from the previous series go. Plus, the HUDs and interface definitely could have used some more work. But realistically, its biggest issue is that the controversy surrounding the game's past and/or its political and social stances will probably end up preventing some people from getting to experience it. Which is a shame, but it can't be helped. But if you dig deeper, it is a truly interesting game with a fascinating history. Its unique look really does help it stand out against other RPGs, especially those character designs, and the stellar voice work and character writing really makes me want to keep pushing forward to see what comes next. And the simple but strategic combat system is a great take on the classic formula and doesn't really get old. Though it is definitely on the easy side, very much a beginner's RPG. But still, if you've ever been a fan of Tome or just love retro RPGs in general, especially Pokemon and Mario RPG, or maybe just looking for a good simple RPG to jump into, then you should definitely check out the Terrain of Magical Expertise. It comes recommended.